Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's an honor for me to chair this session with Dr. Zomlot. So I'll just briefly tell you about the background of the Culture of Peace team that we have chosen for Rising, and then I'll just introduce our keynote speaker. We recognize that peace is far more than the relative absence of violent conflict between several nations. And we believe in culture of peace. We believe that it's built in a long time with dialogue and understanding, mutual understanding. So we believe that peace is about creating and sustaining the right atmosphere for people, communities, and our environments to flourish. And CTPSR has invested extensively in this kind of research, not just on Palestine, but in other contexts as well. We believe that peace is about the interconnectedness and interdependence of a whole range of actions in creating this positive atmosphere. The Culture of Peace team was also relevant for us in the sense that Coventry has a symbolic meaning for peace studies anyways. And in 2021, it is selected as the City of Culture in the United Kingdom. So it's a wonderful moment for us. And we have chosen to speak on the peace process in Palestine at the moment because we believe that perhaps nowhere in the world is the fact that peace is far more than the relative absence of violent conflict. So in the Palestinian context, it's really important. Even there is lack of violence, there might be tensions that needs to be resolved through dialogue. And we believe that Dr. Zomlot will give his insights about this issue to us. Let me briefly introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Husam Zomlot is the head of the Palestinian Mission to the United Kingdom. He also serves as a strategic affairs advisor to the Palestinian president. Prior to his appointment to the UK, Dr. Zomlot served as the Palestinian envoy to the US, and before the closure of the PLO office in Washington, D.C., instigated by President Trump in 2018. His previous official roles include serving as ambassador for the Palestinian presidency and director of the Fatah Foreign Relations Commission. Ambassador Zomlot has since advocated that Britain spearhead the peace process in the Middle East and act as a leader in global diplomacy. The floor is yours, Dr. Zomlot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baha, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, esteemed speakers. It is a great honor, really, and a pleasure to be speaking to you today. I'd like to thank the organizers, in particular, my good friend, Lord Mayor of Canal Wharf, Richard Dixon, who reached out to us. I'm incredibly humbled, really humbled to be invited to speak at the Rising Global Peace Forum on a hugely important topic to all of us, and of course, not least to myself and to the Palestinian people. That topic is the culture of peace. And honored to be at an event backed by the great Desmond Tutu, and which has featured several Nobel Peace Prize winners over the years, including Yemen's Tawakkul Karman. I am indeed a little disappointed to have to do so virtually. It would have been an extraordinary occasion for me to speak to you at the Coventry Cathedral, that monument to the spirit of peace. I mean, the Coventry Cathedral I have visited once, and I was truly looking forward to visiting it again. The arrangements why I would be with you in person, but so is COVID-19. Also, it would have been a great opportunity to meet many of my close and beloved and missed friends. I'm told that Dr. Marwan Darwish is with us, and he's a pride of Palestine, a pride of the UK. Many students of him has graduated or have graduated and now are teaching and professors of Palestinian universities. And also I'm told that my good friend John Kelly, our great friend, leader of the Lib Dems, Friends of Palestine, is with us. I remember my very first trip upon my arrival to the UK out of London was to the beautiful Royal Leamington Spa. I miss you all really, and I hope that we will meet again very soon, despite the coronavirus, or once the coronavirus is behind us. 8 years ago, as you all know, the cathedral and much of Coventry was almost leveled by German bombers. This was the start of a long, hard world war that saw millions upon millions lose their lives. It is a huge testament to Europe that today, 8 decades later, this part of the world is largely an area of peace and prosperity. It is a credit to people like Coventry Cathedral's Provost Howard, who, even during these dark times, preached forgiveness, peace, and called for reconciliation and progress. It is enduring, indeed, it is enduring testament to the UK that after the devastating war, this country was one of the primary architects of a rules-based order, if you may, drafted specifically to ensure that such enormous violence never again be inflicted on the world, never again be inflicted on the humankind. The reconstruction and the rehabilitation of Europe post-war, of course, is really remarkable in every sense of the word. There are lessons to be learned here for the whole world, lessons that are sometimes being ignored elsewhere, and it sometimes seems are occasionally forgotten even in Europe itself. Some of these lessons directly speak to our theme this year of a culture of peace. Because, of course, peace means so much more than merely the absence of violence. That is why, while peace is our natures as individuals, and it is, as societies, it is our natures. As nations, as states, peace has all too often been pushed aside for conflicting interpretations of interests and narrow ideas about entitlements. So peace is indeed a culture. It is a culture, one that needs to be nursed and nurtured so that culture can flourish. And you know, the nursing of peace and the nurturing of peace is absolutely needed now more than ever, because you know, peace is like a small little baby and a small little tree and a small little thing. It is not just something that you call for and preach. It is something that definitely needs to be nursed and nourished. And friends, the consequences of the World War II had reached far and wide, and not least for us, the Palestinian people. Just 3 years after the end of that war, the Second World War, the Palestinian people met their own catastrophe. We met our own catastrophe. The creation of the State of Israel caused our disaster, our Nakba, when nearly 1 million people, more than half of our people at the time, including my own family, parents, grandparents, were made stateless refugees, dispossessed of our homes and our lands and our properties, and never to be allowed to return. Now, it is not my intention here to trace the history of our struggle, the Palestinian struggle, nor even lay blame here or point fingers there. But I do believe that our cause, the Palestinian cause, suggests what are the elements necessary to build and sustain a culture of peace. Palestinians and Israelis are alike, do provide a cautionary tale, if you may, in this topic and on this topic of a culture of peace. So I start with the Nakba, the catastrophe, because I believe that the fact that the fate of these refugees, now in our millions, has yet to be resolved is one of the 3 fundamental reasons that our conflict has not been resolved, and therefore points to one of at least 3 conditions, in my opinion, that need to be met in order for peace to flourish. That is, in order to resolve conflicts, number 1, we need to tackle head-on root causes. and I would like to really stress this, we need to tackle head-on root causes. Before we can do so, we need to understand and study these with an open heart. We must not try and sweep these issues under the carpet because they may complicate our view of the world. After the horrors of the Holocaust, the world saw the creation of a homeland for the Jewish people, already promised decades earlier by the British government. And the world saw that as a moral necessity. But this homeland was to be created in Palestine, in my homeland. And the land's native population, my people, my family, the Palestinian people, became the victims of this project. Their disposition, our disposition, was and remains an unquestioned wrong. Unquestioned wrong. It is one of the fundamental issues at the heart of the conflict we still live with today. That is the reality. It is not neat. Reality is not neat. It is not simple. It is messy and complicated, yes, but it is a fact. And rather than pretending it did not happen, denying it did not happen, or that somehow we can ignore it, we need to try to deal with it based on the historical reality. Which brings me to the second element, which I believe to be crucial for a culture of peace. And that is, in order to lay the foundations for peace, we need to agree on a common moral and legal framework. You know, addressing root causes is crucial, important, but also having a common moral and legal framework is paramount. This is hugely important. It is why rules are a mark of civilization. Indeed, it is what distinguishes civilization from the law of the jungle. It's as simple as that. What distinguishes civilizations from the law of the jungle is the rules that govern us. Because without a common framework, without common rules, that is what we are left with, the law of the jungle. And the law of the jungle allows peace only as the absence of violence, as you have argued at the introduction of this discussion. And only when there is either absolute victory for one side or a balance of power between the conflicting parties, peace may prevail for a specific period of time. This is not what we envisage. Over the past 4 years, we have all seen a disconcerting reversal to something like the law of the jungle on the international scene. Much of this was encouraged by a US administration under Donald Trump that seemed to desire a simpler time where national interests always outweighed multilateral consensus building and compromise. A narrow, very narrow, nationalist suspicion of multilateralism as a sign of weakness, however, is a very dangerous route to go down. Indeed, it is the very route countries went down those 80 years ago that caused so much havoc, so much devastation, so much horrors. It is the very route that the United Kingdom, among others, decided they would cut off once and for all. They did so by erecting, the international community, the United Kingdom, the Europeans, Asia and Africa, the Americas, the human family. We did so all together by erecting a global system of rules and conventions that would govern relations between states. That would set rules for war, the Geneva Conventions, specifically the rights of people, and would particularly the right to self-determination, and would outlaw conquest through violence. You know, the premise of the rules-based international order was the inadmissibility of acquiring land by force and conquest and violence. It must not be forgotten what an achievement this global structure of rules was and remains, embodied as it is, and sometimes also, I have to say, less applied. But in the end, the characters of the United Nations and the various bodies and conventions and resolutions have really embodied, if you may, these rules and these conventions. And for the first time in human history, we have a common framework to which all states and nations, in theory, can appeal, and under which differences can be resolved in a fair, equitable, and transparent manner. Of course, it is a framework that has been specifically designed to be inclusive enough in its principles to appeal to all but the most extreme ideologies. It is both a common and a moral framework based on human rights and an idea of collective rights and humanitarian principles. It is not perfect, of course. It is absolutely not perfect. Nobody knows this more than us, the Palestinians. It is not perfect in part because it allows the world's strong countries an outsized voice. But in the end, it is an enormous advance on anything that has come before. Anything that has come before. It is an enormous advance because it allows everyone an equal appeal to justice as a way to solve conflicts. And the sense of justice fulfilled is crucial to your topic today, to why you meet today, to your forum, to your efforts, which is the culture of peace. And friends, ladies and gentlemen, this international order is therefore a human treasure. And I would want to stress this and repeat this. Our order, our international order, is a human treasure. But we need to take it seriously. We do need to take it seriously and treasure it ourselves. If we do not, if the rich and the powerful are simply allowed to bend these rules, these global rules, bend it to their will, if others are allowed to ignore these rules, we risk losing this global order. Like I say, it's not perfect. It can be improved. And you know the famous saying that the room of improvement is the biggest room. But we really don't want to lose it. Which brings me to the third condition, the third requirement, if you may, for a culture of peace, which is the willingness, the will to abide by these rules, to enforce these rules, to have a recourse to adjudication, to courts, international courts. A common framework gives us a way by which we can judge conduct and conflicts more broadly and find resolutions and solutions. But it means nothing if we are not prepared to abide by these findings. Nothing. Here, perhaps lies the greatest weakness of our international order. It works well when the world's powers or the powerful nations unite to take a joint action and a joint position. It does work well, our international system. It does not work well, however, when these nations are divided or when one or more of them decide to directly contradict the principles and resolutions of that order. A lot of cynicism about the rules-based global order stems from this very fact. And that is a fact. It is a fact, unfortunately, regrettably, but it is a fact. In the face of this, some have, like the Trump administration, resolved simply to withdraw from this order, as you saw with the World Health Organization. I mean, just at the start of a global pandemic, the United States of America pulls out of the international organization in charge of dealing with pandemics, global pandemics, and bringing us together. In effect, this amounts to throwing your hands in the air and simply giving up. Palestinians perhaps have more cause than most to be suspicious about the global order. That on the one hand seems very clear about what are our national and political rights, and yet does little to make it a reality. By the way, Palestine has the most international resolutions in the United Nations Security Council, in the General Assembly for decades, and they all remain unimplemented. We should rightly suspect or be suspicious of an order that is ready or that is ready for over several decades to support that order, even if barely these days an agency to care for Palestinian refugees, even that, UNRWA, even as it does little to secure their rights and resolve their situation. I mean, even UNRWA is under attacks. Without UNRWA being an agency that implements the right of return, some world powers, primarily the US and the Trump administration, have attacked such an international organization that represents the very basic international responsibilities towards Palestinian refugees. Nonetheless, we are also very clear in our appeal to this order, precisely because we believe that for peace to be sustainable, it needs to rest on a shared and agreed framework of rights, transparent to all parties and resolved accordingly. Rules have to be across the board. And we are not giving up on the international order because it offers us a peaceful path to resolving our struggle and ensuring that one day, finally, the people of Palestine will be able to enjoy their freedom in a state of our own with full independence and sovereignty. And our refugees will fulfill their right of return and their right to compensation and their rights according to international standards. But also, this is bigger than the Palestinians and the Israelis, even our region. We live in a globe and there are so many conflicting parties. We are also not giving up on the international order because it is the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. The global rules-based order is something worth fighting for, by peaceful means, of course. And to sum up, really, my friends, ladies and gentlemen, I think the Palestine cause shows us at least three conditions that need to be met in order to begin nurturing a culture of peace. The first, we need acknowledging and we need the knowledge and the understanding of the root causes of conflicts. We need to understand how conflicts arise and what continues to feed them. And we need to be honest and meticulous about these causes. No denial, no ignoring, no brushing under the carpet, no playing clever. We must dig deep, touch the hearts and the wounds of every human being. And the second, we need a common framework of values, a reference, a starting point. Otherwise, we are lost in the wonderland. We need that common framework of values to resolve such conflicts. Such a framework can then be applied to our knowledge of the root causes to offer us a way forward. So first we define the root causes, then we apply that framework on these root causes. So if the root cause is disposition, we have rules. How do we deal with disposition, with refugees, with people who have been displaced? Why do you do so in Kosovo, but you do something different somewhere else? Why do you boycott and impose sanctions on this country if it annexes that land, but you don't apply it on others? That isn't going to sustain our international order. It is my contention that we have such a framework already in the rules-based global order, based as it is on a fundamental notion of rights and equality. Equality among all nations. While not perfect, it is a very strong foundation. And a third, by way of summarizing, we need the political will and the integrity and the enforcement to either abide by the resolutions of that order or impress upon those who are reluctant and apply whatever pressure necessary to ensure compliance. In our case, the one word that has enabled failure for too long at achieving peace was the lack of accountability. It's as simple as that. Israel was both above the law, above the global order. It has enjoyed a culture of impunity for as long as it has been established. Since then, peace, my friends, a culture of peace needs to be nurtured by a sense of justice obtained, fair play, and a sense of wrongs righted and grievances properly addressed. That's my experience. That's our experience. It does need that. It does need a sense of justice obtained. Otherwise, no peace would sustain. We have to believe that justice has been obtained, fulfilled, attained, achieved. Fair play and a sense of wrongs righted. And there have been many wrongs committed to people, inflicted upon people. And all of people's grievances, including our people, the people of Palestine, needs to be properly addressed. This business, peacemaking industry, peace processes, and usually they are in disconnect with the grievances of people. You know, usually they talk about numbers and maps, and no. It is first and foremost about my father. My father, who had left his home, who he was forced out of his home. Somebody took his home, his belongings, his photos, his memories. My father was made refugee more than once in his life. First, when he was just a young child, when the 1948 war happened, we went to Gaza, and I was born in a refugee camp, in the Rafah refugee camp, Shabura, to the very south of the Gaza Strip. I was born as a result. I was the outcome of the catastrophe. And I know I have sat with my father in many occasions to really dig deeper into his grievances, his wounds. Sad I am that he did not see the day when he is returned, and when this has been addressed. He passed away only 2 months ago here in London. But I was hoping that one day his grievances and the sense of wrongs that have been done to him and his family and our people indeed would have been addressed before another generation is to actually endure that suffering and that injustice. And I need all this, my friends, all this need not to be a zero-sum game, need not to be a zero-sum game. Indeed, it can and ought to be a win-win. I assure you, it can be a win-win. I come from a place of conflict, of unresolved wrongs or continued sufferings, and yet I'm hopeful. I am absolutely hopeful. I'm hopeful in part because of the example of places like Coventry and Europe generally. That is, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Look where Europe was 80 years ago, and look where Europe is today. Look where Coventry is, the beacon and the capital of culture, European culture. The UK government has acknowledged Coventry for what it has gone through and what it is now spreading and radiating worldwide of inspiration, of that message that you all gather today for, the message of peace and the message of culture of peace. That peace with justice is possible. That peace with justice is possible. It has happened here in Europe, and it can certainly happen in Palestine. And that ultimately, that is a shared interest strong enough to take us there. Take us there. So thank you, and peace be upon you.
Thank you so much, dear Dr. Zomlot. This was a very moving speech. We have received some questions, so would you like to answer them one by one, or shall I just read the questions first and you give an overall answer, however you prefer?
You decide, Ms. Chairperson.
I think we have enough time, so we can go one by one.
Yes.
So the first question came from Marwan Darwish. I think you know him very well. So he says that up until now you focused on the top level actors in your speech, states and UN agencies, etc. What do you think the role of the British public and academic institutions in the UK do to support culture of peace?
Thank you, Dr. Marwan. We miss you. And as the Queen said, we will meet again, hopefully very soon. Um, well, this is a very relevant question, and I really wanted to focus on the overall picture of a culture of peace. But your question is a very relevant one. The role of the British public, it's huge, it's immense, and in my opinion, the United Kingdom, Britain, has such a unique role to play. It's almost a role in search of an actor, given the following. Number one, the historic responsibility of the United Kingdom on the cause of Palestine. I mean, the UK has given our land away without even consulting us, the Balfour Declaration. The United Kingdom took mandate of Palestine in the years that followed the Balfour, the infamous Balfour Declaration that we marked only a couple of weeks ago, the 2nd of November. And took a mandate by the United Nations that I was speaking about only minutes ago. And yet in that mandate, it was to implement that declaration without any serious regard to the native indigenous population. And it left the mess in 1948, and it is implicated in all that happened. And I'm saying this not by way of pointing blame or guilt, but I'm saying this of pointing to the need for leadership, the need for responsibility. On the one hand. On the other hand, we are very much aware how significant the United Kingdom, both at the official level as a state and at the public level, how central this country is. It's a very close relationship with the US. It's the strongest ally of the US, the biggest ally of the US. Its relationship to Europe and the United Kingdom, whether in the Union or not, is a key European country. Any serious statement, you will have the United Kingdom among the key European players about global affairs, of course, including France, Germany, Italy, Spain, etc. Also, the United Kingdom is key and has good relations with Israel, with us, the Palestinian government, with the Arab world, etc. But without expanding much more, the most important part of the United Kingdom was never its governments, and I must say this publicly, it was always its people, and that's why your question is the right question. It's people because we know very well that the South Africa anti-apartheid movement started here in London. The capital of global activism to end the apartheid system in South Africa was home in, I mean, London was the home of that campaign, the capital, the center. And we are aware how much the British people are active, how much civil institutions there are, and how much we need that engagement, Dr. Marwan Darwish. And perhaps it's the most arena that we need to engage in, and the most transformative arena should we succeed. And by the way, we are aware of a report 10 years ago, 2010, that was written in Israel and submitted to the Israeli Prime Minister about the danger of the British people activism and solidarity with Palestine, and that it might be a repeat of the anti-apartheid movement, and how much Israel did over the last 10 years to try and mud the waters here. And without going into details, conflate and confuse the British public about the absolute, on the one hand, the absolute need to eradicate anti-Semitism. And we must all eradicate anti-Semitism. I mean, race, no one understands this more than us, the Palestinians, the cost of racism. And if you hate Jews, you hate Muslims, you hate Christians, you hate yourself even. So it must be eradicated. But there are some attempts at conflating that with eradicating occupation, eradicating colonization, siege, the violation of human rights, the illegal policies by Israel. And that has caused some issues that we need to revisit here in the United Kingdom. But I assure you, Dr. Marwan, we have the infrastructure. We have the base. Wherever I go, I see the depth of support, particularly among the young. Yesterday, I was addressing, only yesterday, last night, a group of students from King's University. They invited me for a talk, and I saw the future leaders and diplomats of this country and beyond, because it was a degree in diplomacy. How the knowledge is there and the awareness is there. And we need to apply a bottom-up approach in the United Kingdom. And without going much further, I assure you that if 10% of our time here is dedicated on the government, 90% of the time is dedicated on the British public. We have a long way to go. There is a room for improvement. And I very much agree that the hope is there. And hopefully it will be achieved.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zomlot. So we had another question. Are you hopeful for a future of peace in Palestine? But I think you answered that in your speech and also in this one. So I'm moving to another question. What would you say are the next steps that ought to be taken by the international community to ensure prospects of peace globally?
The following. That's a very important question. Number one, we must be absolutely religious about the framework of peacemaking. We should never allow one side to dictate the rules of engagement. Otherwise, it's gone. The other side will not accept, as happened during the Trump administration. I mean, the so-called ultimate deal. We simply told him, we're not interested. This is not a peace plan. This is a war plan. So we need to agree on the framework, and the international community need to come out again and very clearly define the framework as in international resolutions. There's no time to waste and to just be at the whim of Netanyahu and quests for re-elections and being taken so far right by some rather personal calculations. So framework is very important. So we need countries like the United Kingdom, countries beyond, to keep confirming that we are talking about the 1967 borders, that Israel's occupation that began in 1967 must end, that a state of Palestine must be created, a sovereign, independent state of Palestine, not the Mickey Mouse state that was offered by Trump, the Swiss cheese that was offered by Trump. And by the way, the holes in the cheese is us, the Palestinian towns, and not the Israeli settlements even. And that East Jerusalem is the capital of that state of Palestine. And that a just resolution to the issue of refugees is absolutely a requirement for peace. This is the position of the international community, but it needs to be said. Second, we need to change the mechanism. The US can no longer play the role of the mediator. It has been discredited, and this is not just an issue of Trump. I was the ambassador to the US. I've spent some of my life in the US. Even before that, I have studied the US. I have many friends there. And I must say, we have an issue with the US, not only with Trump. I mean, Trump was in alliance with the settler movement. Trump was in alliance with the expansionist Israel, with the colonial Israel, with the besieging Israel. Trump was in alliance with the annexation agenda. But America has always been biased to Israel itself. So Trump was biased to the settlers, but America is biased to Israel. And we need to balance that. And therefore, we need to revisit the mechanism. And the mechanism has got to be an international frame, an international mechanism, multilateral mechanism. We need to see the world on the table, not just the United States of America. Yes, the US is a key player, and we understand that it will always have to play a role. But the US exclusion of other players must end. Enough. Europe is important. China is crucial. Russia is a key player. Africa, the rest of the world, the Arab world need to be on the table. Thirdly, we need a timeline, a peace process that is open-ended, like what happened to us over the last so many years. I mean, 29 years since the Madrid peace process. And, it was open-ended, and talks after talks. In any future international efforts, we have to say, this process is going to take 6 months, and then we'll have to conclude. A timeline is important. Deadline is important. Of course, after establishing that international mechanism, International Peace Conference. Finally, last and fourth point for an international peace effort to succeed is one word: consequences. Consequences. If you don't have the will, the power, the ability to impose, to enforce your framework, and to actually hold parties accountable should they unilaterally inflict and apply illegal policies, don't start a peace process. It's worthless. And consequences are very clear. This is, I said in my earlier remarks, this is what a prime reason why international peacemaking efforts failed Israel was not genuine about the two-state solution. America was not able to play the role of the honest mediator. The international community was unable to really provide consequences for illegality. If we deal with these issues, I think we have a better shot at peace.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zomlot. A very structured answer, and I think it was really clear what you were trying to say. So the other question is about colonization. So our participant is asking how to stem the peace culture on colonization. What is the impact of colonization on human rights and social justice in the modern world?
This is a very important question, actually, because there are many kinds of control systems. I mean, there is the military occupation, that you are governed by military rules. And we have that. Israel governed the occupied territories, the occupied people by military rules. But there is another system of control, which is colonization, i.e. your intention is to colonize the land and bring your own population into the occupied territories, which is very well defined in international law, in the Geneva Conventions, as a war crime. This is a war crime. So Israel has been colonizing the Palestinian territories since at least 1967 and before. The third is a colonization that aims not only at colonizing the land, but replacing the people altogether, which is a third form, much more even grave than the second, which is just normal. You are after the land, not the people. But this is also what is happening. I mean, since 1947, 48, it is a displacement and replacement exercise. A displacement and replacement exercise. And by the way, not only replacement vis-a-vis the land, but sometimes literally taking our homes and beds and bed sheets and appropriating our culture. Appropriating our culture, you know, the Israeli knafe. Fine if you like it. I mean, I don't mind. I don't mind, but don't upset our people in Nablus. I mean, it's very precious. Our knafe is. It's fine to say, you know, Nablisi knafe, Palestinian knafe. Don't be obsessed about appropriating people's culture and property and identity and millennia of of norms, and it's very fake, according to Trump, fake news. Fourthly, there is the apartheid system. So we spoke about military occupation, colonization, displacement and replacement, and then apartheid. What is apartheid? Apartheid is the application of two legal systems for two different distinct people. That's apartheid. In Israel, it's not apartheid, it's apartheids with an S. Apartheids. I lost count how many apartheids there are that Israel is employing. There is a legal system for Israeli Jews, distinct, a legal system for Palestinian citizens of Israel, distinct, different. And by the way, there is a law in the Knesset that specifically targets them. It was passed only 2 years ago, the nation state law, that they have no right of self-determination. It's only for the first group. Unheard of that a parliament comes out with such a racist law. That's the second. There is a law for the people in Palestine, I mean the occupied territories, the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza. And let's stick with this third law, third apartheid. The third apartheid has 3 sub-apartheids in it. So there is a law, legal arrangements, military mostly, for residents of East Jerusalem. They are different. They have different even colors of ID. Dr. Marwan Darwish knows more about this. There is a different legal system to the West Bank, residents of the West Bank, Palestinian population in the West Bank. And there is definitely a third sub-apartheid for Gaza. I mean, the worst one as far as the Israeli apartheid is Gaza. I mean, the besiegement for all these years. And you don't want to be in Gaza if you want to move. And there is a last apartheid that has to do with us, the outside now, the Palestinian refugees and diaspora. These people are absolutely blocked and denied. So we in Palestine have the experience of all those. And sometimes things get confusing. Some wants to focus on one of the forms and not the others. I think we need to adopt a rights-based approach, regardless of what is it that we are. Are we about decolonization? Are we about liberation? Are we about equal rights and ending of apartheid? I know all these questions arise. Let's not waste our time now. We are just about rights, and regardless of the institutional setting, how these rights will be achieved, one state, two states, it doesn't matter. What matters is how sacred the right of self-determination is, that is independence, liberation, how sacred the right of return is, and how non-negotiable our right to equality is. And we should struggle in that, and don't really waste much of our time about the form of states that will emerge out of this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zomlot. We have more questions actually. Do you think peace is achieved from the top level institutions or grassroots organizations?
Both. Of course, both. Of course, both. And but I am with the question about the grassroots and the base as your most important, sustainable, strong ally. Absolutely. And we are under no illusion that governments and states can actually deliver the goods that we discussed earlier, the goods of peace and the culture of peace. Governments are usually run by politicians, and politicians, like myself, are way more concerned about political calculations and being politically correct. But people are not. People are guided by their principles. People are guided by their values. And in every single scenario where there was a breakthrough, a transformation, an end of illegality, an end of injustice, it was the work of people, global citizens, particularly the British people. Back to the question by Dr. Marwan earlier, Marwan Darwish. And people ask me how much I am excited about the possible end of the Trump era and the election of Biden and Harris. And I say I am excited, but not because of the election of Biden and Harris. I am only excited because of the phenomena that is happening among the American people on the ground, in the base, the democratic base, and the progressive voices that are coming in numbers and in force, like the young lady from New York, Alexandra Cortez. I was reading an article by her or of her in the New York Times, and she's not the mainstream, but forces are coming. The change that is happening in our own community, the Palestinian community. Now we have more than 6 elected members of the Senate, not the Congress, but state Senates, and some in the Congress itself, like Rashida Tlaib. Our community is participating much more in the political life of the US. The changes in the Arab and the Muslim communities, they have voted with their feet this time, and they have made sure absolutely that they would be heard. Michigan, and they are very heavily present. You're talking about a big number in Arizona, in Pennsylvania, and the Biden campaign realized that the Arab and Muslim communities in the US played a crucial role. Also, there is a change in the Jewish community, a progressive change in the Jewish community in the United States of America. And I tilted to the US because we have to apply it here. I mean, do you know that only 22% of the Jewish voters in America voted for Trump? Only 22%. Because in the end, the Jewish community of America, especially the younger generation, are way more inspired, way more committed to liberalism and the values we discussed than the support to Israel. Because Netanyahu said already that Trump was the best friend of Israel and supporter of Israel ever. Yet the Jewish community rewarded their own values and their own definition. And I'm not going to go on of the list of changes in the base in the US, but there are changes. Some of it are positive here in the United Kingdom. Some of it we need to tackle head on. But I must say, there is a challenge to face here in the United Kingdom. There is a challenge to face. Over the last few years, particularly last 5 years, people have started increasingly to become much more cautious, and I have to say fearful of supporting Palestine in the public, fearing of the backlash of what I have discussed earlier. And there are a lot on the Labour Party and what happened, without going into details there. There is a lot of thinking, there is a lot of action here, and I think your efforts now, your forum, your group is key. I visited your area with John Kelly many times. COVID-19 has really disabled us from a key thing, which is human interaction. I hope this COVID-19, according to Fauci, it should disappear in a few months once we have the vaccine and spread it. I hope, and I add my voice to yours, that we would start again the journey of having the people to deliver their verdict rather than only governments.
Thank you so much. Actually, we have a question from Mr. John Kelly. The new administration in the US does present an opportunity for a new dynamic in the peace process. Planned elections in Palestine would presumably help that dynamic. So is there a danger that the departure of Trump will provide an excuse for delaying these elections again?
No, there is no connection between Trump and the elections. Of course, we don't live in a vacuum. Hello, John. How are you? I miss you, my friend. There is no connection there. Of course, we don't live in a vacuum, and we are part of a global system and global politics, and we interact. But Palestinian elections is first and foremost a Palestinian national requirement. It has been delayed for a long time. For reasons that you know, John, and our friends here know, there has been a very painful division that happened in the year 2007. Only 1 year after we convened a parliamentary elections and presidential elections. That saw President Abbas elected as president, and saw Hamas win a majority in our legislative council. And there was a government formed by Hamas soon after. Ismail Haniyeh was the prime minister. And we are so proud. You know, sometimes we focus on the half empty, but we are so proud that we are among the very few nations in the entire region still under occupation and colonization and displacement and replacement and the apartheids, and still produce a democratic process and still have a smooth transition of government, unlike Trump. I'm sure you're following him not conceding and causing havoc as we speak. But we Palestinians do not look at democracy, Kelly, and at elections, John, only as a way of renewing our political system, which is crucial, absolutely crucial. And it's not just a way of reverting back to our people, significant, but it's a method of resistance. It's a method of resistance. When you vote, when you exercise that right, for us, it is as crucial as any other method of resistance. And it is needed now more than ever. So what are we waiting for? What is holding this process? Allow me not to go into the details of the blame game, because we are all responsible here. However, we have two major hurdles to make. First is to make sure that Hamas is fully on board of this, so elections are done fairly and transparently in Gaza. Remember, we are proud because our elections are not just elections, they are transparent elections. Many international visitors, including from the UK, participate, monitor our elections. So we want to convene a transparent elections. And under the current situation in Gaza, with Hamas in control, we have to make sure that happens, and we need a firm written commitment about it. But an equally important issue for us is voting in East Jerusalem. We will not convene elections for the sake of elections. We would want to convene elections so the entire people of Palestine participate as much as possible, and that it is a national process rather than only a regional or local. Can you imagine an election without East Jerusalem? And there is a lot of work that is being done right now to make sure that the international community, and here the Biden administration might help actually, because Trump did not help. And to the contrary, he was part of the problem, part of the conflict, to ensure that Israel will not, as they have already publicly said, will not block our people in East Jerusalem to vote in the elections. So I am hoping that elections will be the way forward, and I'm hoping that it will be sooner than later to end this bleak chapter in our history.
Thank you so much for insightful comments. So the last question comes from CTPSR's Professor Mike Hardy. So he says, Dr. Zomlot, thank you so much for your care and clarity. Many have worked hard and in parentheses and remain hugely sad at our failure, parenthesis closed, to promote a just and fair two-state solution with a just reclamation of lands. Is this now a dead as part of your treasured optimism?
Hello, Professor. Professor Hardy, we also miss you and thank you for being with us today. That's a difficult question. And to end with, you give me a very, very difficult task. No, I don't think any form of a solution could be declared dead. What we could declare dead is our will to implement it. That's about it. I mean, you know, if we have sufficient will, if we have the power relations, if we have the right policies backed by the will of the international community, a two-state solution could be implemented yesterday. Yesterday. Go back to all the record, Professor, to the history. You will see that Israel only functioned, only acted after pressure and out of pressure, not out of talks, negotiations, nice, you know, convincing, persuade. You know, we are nice people. You are nice people. Let's make peace. That it didn't work this way. We have been at it for 29 years. 29 years. What do you want, Israel? You must recognize us. Okay, we will do. Here is it. Yes, Arafat. We recognize the state of Israel on 1967. Will you recognize us in exchange? No, 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 no. We won't. It has to be interim arrangements, and in 5 years we will. Fine. What else you want? We want to establish an interim arrangement so we can trust you. Oh my God, fine. Trust us. What else you want? We want a security arrangement so you can actually protect us while we are leaving your territory. Upset. I'm not going to go into the process, and there are so many mistakes that were done in that process. But if you go to the other scenarios, Israel has left Sinai of Egypt after the 1973 war. And Egypt engaged militarily in a way that was very, very, very painful to Israel. Israel left South Lebanon after all that you have followed up until 2006. Israel left Gaza also to sow the seeds of division, to lay siege on Gaza, but also because Gaza has become unbearable. And I'm not talking about a scenario of violence, so I am absolutely clear. But I am talking about a scenario of consequences. Of consequences. And we are calling for bloodless, peaceful, non-violent consequences. And that's why we are going to the International Criminal Court. That's why we are seeking popular resistance on the ground. That's why we are elevating our status in the various international forums, because we believe that these consequences, including our work here, like back to the question about the British people, our main call here is to apply sanctions on Israel, is to ban settlement products, is to ban settlers from coming to the United Kingdom. That's what will bring peace. That kind of pressure, like, why is it? Why is it? And I'm going on about how do we implement the two-state solution. Why is it that a Palestinian from Ramallah or Gaza cannot visit the United Kingdom without a visa? However, an Israeli illegal settler in the settlement of Efrat in the middle of the occupied territories can come to the United Kingdom without a visa. I mean, what? How is it that British companies are still working in illegal settlements and providing key materials like JCP? And we are making a big campaign now about JCP. And I'm so proud of the Palestinian Lawyers for Human Rights here in the UK that they have just won a case with the government to investigate and to put this company under the... So to do the two-state solution, it's possible. It could be done immediately if Israel's calculation changed. That's it. If Netanyahu's calculation changed. We also could do the one state. And let me say this, Professor Hardy, we Palestinians are fine with one state that is absolutely constitutional, egalitarian, democratic, and provide full equal rights for all of its citizens. It was the PLO platform before 1988 How did we come to adopt the two-state solution? Because the international community, the United Kingdom, the United States, Europe, the rest of the world demanded of us and from us that we accept the two-state solution, accept international legitimacy, ally ourselves with international resolutions. And I just want to say the two-state solution was not a Palestinian demand. Never. It was a Palestinian concession to ally ourselves with international legitimacy. So in one sentence, I have hope for a two-state solution to be implemented, but that two-state solution will not be implemented without garnering sufficient will, enforcement to do it, and that has to come through consequences for illegality. And I assure you, Israel will be the first to quit the occupied territories and quit the illegal settlements.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zomlot. This was very valuable. And I'm sure Mike would love to discuss this further, but unfortunately we have to wrap up our session now. Thank you so much for your contributions. If you would like to say anything to our participants, Dr. Zomlot, please feel free to do so before we close the session.
I just want to say, keep on, stay on. If there is any source of hope, Bahar, it's you and the Rising Forum and the people in Coventry and the people all across the UK, the people all across the world. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart. We take inspiration, we take hope in you. We have been wronged, as I say, for a long time, but the main source of hope and confidence in the future is you. So I very much look forward to seeing you in person very soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your contributions.